Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your Pest Geek, here discussing all things pest. We want to remind our audience to join in on the revolution. That's right, join in on the conversation, be part of the society. Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group on Facebook. And we're on YouTube. We're on the web, pestgeekpodcast.com. Check out there the notes, everything that we put into the podcast. They're all on there. And here is Stephen Van Tassel with today's topic.
Thanks, Frank. Stephen Van Tassel here, wildlife control consultant, giving you another episode here of Living the Wildlife. Wanted to continue from last week's presentation on 13-line ground squirrels. Recall that was one of the topics that was raised on the Facebook page. I'm always looking for additional topics for people that people want to hear. Otherwise, I'd just talk about what interests me. So one of the topics that people asked for was 13-line ground squirrels. So last week I spoke about 13-line ground squirrel biology. And this week I'm going to talk about control methods for 13-line ground squirrels. So let's review some of those tactics. Now, we always want to start when we're dealing with wildlife and even with other pest animals like insects, is you want to think about how can you modify the conditions that allowed that animal to be there. For example, if you have a situation with cockroaches, well, if you can get rid of the moisture and really drop the humidity level and moisture availability for those cockroaches, you're going to have a lot fewer cockroaches to deal with. Well, the same thing occurs when you're dealing with other animals like 13-line ground squirrels. And so that's what we mean by habitat modification. One of my phrases is, if you build it, they will come. And if you remove it, they will go. So sometimes your clients will ask you, why am I having this problem? I've lived here for 10 years. I've never had this problem before, blah, 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 blah. Well, the reason is because the animal populations change and the conditions of the area allow them to be there. So the challenge with habitat modification is that a lot of people don't like those changes, and the changes may take a little while to work, or they're expensive in the sense that it requires some investment of time and energy. Nevertheless, I'm going to talk about it in many ways, even though I know that for most of you, this will be beyond your control, but we always need to consider it as the option. So I always have a set standard of option when I talk about control methods. It always goes from the topics that I cover would be habitat modification, exclusion, frightening devices, repellents, shooting, trapping, toxicants, other means. And that's basically it. So that you try to make sure you have sort of a mental list of techniques, even though you know your client may not be that interested in some of them. If the client, says, I want to know all the options, well, you go right down that list and you say, well, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. So we're going to do that with 13-line ground squirrels here. So let's start with habitat modification. 13-line ground squirrels, given that they're not very big, like to have short grass. And so, like that golf course-like lawn, that's beautiful for them. Why? Because they can see all their enemies coming at them. So when you're that small, a lot of things want to eat you. And so a 13-line ground squirrel likes to have short grass. So what's the alternative? Let the grass grow tall. Animals like 13-line ground squirrels don't like tall grass because it hinders their ability to see. It makes them more vulnerable to predation. Now, that being said, what animal does like tall grass? Well, voles. So there's no free lunch. So if you remove conditions for one animal, you may create conditions that are favorable for another. But it's going to take a while for voles to get in there. But those are certainly one option for you. I'm not going to spend much time talking about habitat modification or cultural controls for 13-line ground squirrels, because I'm assuming most of my audience here is not dealing with an agricultural environment. So there are different techniques for the agricultural side, because as we noted the last time I spoke, that 13-line ground squirrels can be damaging for people in agricultural production. But most of you are going to be dealing with residential areas, urbanized, semi-urbanized, like suburban areas, maybe exurban. But none of you are probably going to be dealing with people with 13-line ground squirrels over 10, 15 acres. Okay. If that's the case, drop me a line, or better yet, Google my name, Van Tassel, that's VANTASSEL, plus 13-line ground squirrels. 13-liner is spelled 13, like the word 13, the number 13, dash liner, LINER, ground squirrels. 13-lined ground squirrels. Ground squirrels is also 2 words. And you'll come up with a publication that will give you some tips on how to handle 13-line ground squirrels in agricultural situations. So let me just get that off the chest. So the next category that we're going to touch on would be frightening devices. Well, that's quick and easy. There are none. So can you waste your time trying to buy an owl or flashing lights or ultrasound? Sure. But you're going to be just doing that, wasting your time. There's no evidence any of these products will work on ground squirrels. And think about it. By the time that they're established, if the animal is already established there, what's a frightening device going to do to it? It's already in an urbanized area. If it's not afraid of all these people running around and dogs and, of course, the free range cat problem is a huge. But if not afraid, then what's a little widget going to do for them, right? So, we have to think about what that means. And so, can you try it? Sure, you can try it. But if you come up, maybe you'll find the one thing that'll work. We can see I'm pretty skeptical on this. I'm happy to be convinced otherwise, but good luck. It's sort of like trying to find a safe cigarette, right? So, could there be one? Sure. But University of Kentucky tried for 20 years and finally gave up. So, you can certainly do that, but I'm not holding my breath. And so chances are you need to make money and move on to another client as you resolve this one. So frightening devices really aren't going to work. What about repellents? Well, repellents are primarily used in agricultural settings to protect the seeds from being preyed upon. As you recall from my last presentation, 13-line ground squirrels, their former name was called Spermophilus. That was their genus name. Well, they're seed lovers, right? So they eat other things, but they like seeds. So the repellent was to be put on seeds to prevent the seed from being taken by the 13-line ground squirrel. Well, there is one, but it's more of an agricultural situation. Some other repellents have been out there, such as people have tried mothballs. You got to be careful with mothballs. A lot of people are using them off-label. Be careful. I think there's some legal issues involved with that. There's some safety issues involved with that. There's also some people that have tried things like dried blood, which is used to repel deer. Again, those things may have had limited success. I think for business owners like yourself, I really wouldn't waste your time with it. So I really don't think there's a repellent in the market. Certainly there's no repellents that are going to drive the squirrels away from the area. So if you're looking for something that's going to be like a perimeter barrier, no, that's just not going to happen. Because think about it. The animals can just walk over it, right? And so when you listen to my podcast in the future, we get into more control methods for other animals, you're going to hear this refrain over and over again, that this is why repellents often don't work for wildlife, because of their high availability. What about exclusion? Well, exclusion can be helpful, but a lot of customers will not like putting up fences on their property. So what would you need to do? You'd want to have something that's like a 1/4 inch hardware cloth. You need to have it at least 18 inches tall. Ground squirrels can climb. So if you want to put a little roof over the top of it, so you bend it at a 90-degree angle out to make it a little bit harder for them to climb over the top. The other option is you can make that 18 inches a little more wobbly. So if they're starting to climb, they're wobbling on it. That's going to be hard given how light they are. You can always make it taller, or if you really want to ramp it up, if you used flashing, aluminum flashing, it's too smooth to climb, right? But again, you need that 18 inches. Buried in the soil somewhat. The recommendation is 6 inches, but you may be able to get away with less. It depends on how hard you want to get into this, right? So probably a lot of your clients are not going to be too keen on that, but there could be situations where maybe it's out of view and, some hardware cloth and some flashing would be appropriate. Remember, you can always buy painted flashing. So that it would blend in better. Those are available, or you can just simply paint it yourself. A lot of people really get manicky about color and how things look, when in fact, if you do a few small things to exclusion items, people find out that their paranoia about it really was overblown. And that happens a lot with things like chimney caps. Oh, it's going to look ugly on the roof. Well, no, it really doesn't. Your cracking chimney looks ugly, man. So these are things that sometimes people, the newness is more frightening to them than really how it actually looks. So it's how your salesmanship is going to be part of the process on this. How about toxicants? Are there any poison baits out there for 13-line ground squirrels? And the answer is yes, there is one. Zinc phosphide is the active ingredient, restricted use pesticide, very hot. If you've used tracking powder, a lot of your tracking powders for rodents are zinc phosphide based, although Leaf Attack has a chlorphacetinone one, which is an anticoagulant. I'm not sure if there's a diphacinone product. I'd have to look that up, but for 13-line ground squirrels, there is zinc phosphide, and it can be used in lawns, but you want to be careful. Because if an animal, it has a high primary toxicity, I hope all of you know what that means. If not, I think I have another podcast where I talked about the use of toxicants. But it has basically zero secondary poisoning. So if a dog or cat is eating the dead ground squirrel, they're going to be fine. But if they eat the grain directly, I'm not sure why they would, but stranger things have happened. That could kill them. Fortunately, zinc phosphide has a bitter taste. So most animals, when they eat it, don't want to eat much of it because it's bitter. And things like dogs, a dog might eat almost anything. A dog will most likely throw it up. It'll get sick, could die, but it would be relatively rare depending on the size of the dog and how quick he ate it and that sort of thing. So there is going to be risk. And so how you would use that product is the label. Of course, follow the label. Label is the law. But you have to pre-bait, means you have to put some untreated grain by the burrow, which would be about 1 teaspoon, but not a tablespoon, teaspoon, very small amount. Sprinkle that near the burrow, not pile it. That conditions the ground squirrel to eat the grain. Then you come back 2 or 3 days later, apply the zinc phosphide. They eat it, die, everything's good to go. But it's a little time consuming, a little tedious. Some people may get nervous about putting toxicant out on lawns where they're not in the bait station. You may say, well, why don't I put the zinc phosphide in the bait station? Well, it depends on your label. Your label may not allow you to. Labels must say explicitly and specifically that you are allowed to put it in a bait station. So that's very important for you to understand. So if it's not on the label, you can't put it in the bait station. So that's one of the challenges with that. But it is available, and it's something that you can use, and it will work very well. And again, a teaspoon's a very, very small amount, but it is an option for you. I suspect that most of you are going to probably rely on trapping. But no, there's one more thing. Let me get back to toxicants, in terms of poisons. We've talked about toxic bait, talked about zinc phosphide. Let's talk about fumigants. Two different types of fumigants that are registered. One's an ignitable gas cartridge. The other one's aluminum phosphide. Ignitable gas cartridges are general use. Doesn't make them safe. Just means that your homeowner can pick one up. They're a little safer than aluminum phosphide. Aluminum phosphide is a restricted use pesticide. There's a lot more regulations about it. I don't want to go into a lot of detail on that. Probably should have a presentation just on aluminum phosphide. But with the ignitable gas cartridges, two different styles. You have the fat version from USDA Wildlife Services, and then you have the thin version, which is usually from another manufacturer like the Giant Smoker or something. Giant Destroyer, I think is the name of the company, name of the product. Make sure when you're using the ignitable gas cartridge that it fits into the burrow before you light it. This is one of the problems with the ignitable gas cartridges from USDA Wildlife Services. So USDA Wildlife Services, theirs are almost 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches wide. They're big. They're really fat. They're not going to probably fit into a ground squirrel burrow. 13-line ground squirrel burrow. 13-line ground squirrels are like the size of a silver dollar. Maybe 1.5 inches wide. Very smooth. It's like someone just punched a hole in the ground. The Giant Destroyers, however, should fit, but you want to make sure it will fit before you light it, because otherwise things can get wild and woolly there pretty quickly. So how you would use it, you'd light the cartridge, insert it down into the burrow as far as it will go, and then you cork the hole so the gas stays inside the burrow. Ideally, you want to do it after a rain when the soil moisture is very high. It holds the gas in the burrow better, and you reduce the risk of causing a fire. It's very embarrassing to be trying to fumigate a burrow with an ignitable gas cartridge, and you set the grass on fire. Make sure you monitor the area, look for where any of the smoke's coming on the ground. Be careful how close you are to the house. Carbon monoxide gas can seep through cracks and foundations and that sort of thing and settle into the basement. Have there been any incidents of death from that? I am not aware of any. It's not like aluminum phosphide. It doesn't have that level of toxicity. Most people will smell the smoke and realize that something is wrong and act accordingly because it's pretty acrid stuff. But you want to be careful and be prudent. Just because something is legal, you've heard me say this before, just because something is legal doesn't make it wise. So just because you can use one near a foundation of a house doesn't mean you should use one near a fountain. So how far away should you be? I would recommend at least 20 feet. That would be my recommendation. So 20 feet from the structure would be a good rule of thumb. Again, if your label says something different, follow that label. Okay. But I would always err on the side of caution. All right. So will it work? It could be something quick and easy. Ba-ding, you bang that out, you're good to go. All right. And then if if it comes back or it didn't quite work, try it again. So those are your toxicant options. But I suspect, as I said before, most of you are going to be relying on trapping. Two different types of trapping that we want to focus on. Kill trapping and cage trapping or box trapping. So let's talk about kill trapping. Kill trapping, you'd want to use something like a rat trap. If you're using the breakback type, you'd want to make sure you modify those traps to make sure that the striker bar is hitting with full strength. That is, the two tines that dig into the wood, you'd want to make sure you lift those up with a screwdriver and put a piece of metal underneath them. I've used washers put underneath that to help give a little bit more tension. You use expanded trigger, bait it with some sort of seeds, peanut butter, oats, put it inside of a bait station and use that. Never want to use baited traps, particularly if you're using seeds, out from under cover because you're going to whack birds. And then you start running into danger of federal law problems and all that. Always put those baited traps inside of a bait station or under cover so birds can't get access to it. It also reduces whacking other animals that you don't want to hit. Place those traps in close proximity. You can even put them inside of a PVC pipe. Just make sure the PVC pipe is large enough to allow the striker bar to go off. You could use other things like the clamshell style versions. You have some options there to work with, and that will certainly be useful for you. What about baited cage traps? Well, you could certainly use a small baited cage trap. Probably want to use a 5x5x15 style trap and just simply put those nearby. You can wire your doors open, put some food in there, condition them to walk in, and then come back a couple days later, set the traps, rebait them, and set them and be done with it. Do think about covering your traps, partly because animals, 13-line ground squirrels, if they're exposed to sun all day long inside of a cage trap, it will probably kill them. They'll die of stress. So they're also small, going to be high strung. If they don't have a place of cover, they're going to be stressed because of that as well. So my recommendation is, if you have a choice, you'd want to probably go with the kill traps inside bait stations or inside of other types of cover, so that the animal's not being stressed and you don't have to necessarily be worried about having to check that trap to get there because the animal's dying of heat stress. So I think it's going to be a little more humane in that situation. If your clients are telling you, look, they have to have quote unquote live capture, I hate that phrase because it's a little disingenuous at times, but without getting too far into this, you can use an interesting cage trap where there's no bait at all. And it's a trap manufactured by Bethel, Bethel, I believe it is. Bethel trap. And what it is, it's a cage trap with a one-way door that you uses a positive set. It's designed so that you would actually set the trap directly over the hole. So the only place the ground squirrel can come out is into the trap, hits the one-way door, and then gets captured. Awesome idea. I wish I had the opportunity to try it out for myself with 13-liners, but I've heard good reports about it. I don't get any money from Bethel Trap, so I wish I did. I'm happy to receive it if someone has a donation for me. But this trap, what you do is you'd go into an area, you'd get a bunch of these traps together, and you basically put one over every hole. You'd want to do it on a day that's bright and sunny, because that would be when the ground squirrels are out. And you would simply put the trap over the hole, walk away, have lunch, come back in an hour or so. And when they're really active, that's when they're popping into those cage traps. And you just simply remove them and move them on. And so people have used these types of traps inside of, cemeteries, for example, places where there's maybe high foot traffic, or people are worried about, the idea of using kill traps or that sort of thing, or using toxicants, and you're able to just remove them, and everyone thinks you're putting them somewhere where they're going to be happy forever or whatever. But it is a pretty good option for you to use if you're interested in using sort of a cage trap solution. What about shooting? Shooting is an option for you. If you are in a situation, we have to watch the laws today. A lot of you are going to be in areas where the regulations in your area do cover air rifles. They're treated as a firearm, so you're going to have to make sure you find out. Some of you are going to live in areas where pellet rifles are not considered a firearm. Do your due diligence, because it can vary from community to community. And again, just because it's legal doesn't make it wise. So you want to be thinking about context. This is a very contextualized situation. So you can certainly think about shooting a 22 caliber gun or a 177 caliber air rifle, will certainly be more than enough power for you to take care of that 13-line ground squirrel without a doubt. What about some other alternative techniques? What do I mean by alternative techniques? Alternative techniques are those that are not regulated. For example, you could put a cage over the trap, or simply put a net over the hole, cage over the hole, or a net over the hole, and then flood them out with water. That would be an alternative method. Yep, you certainly could do that. Watch yourself, and you want to be careful of like using the proverbial shovel, banging it over the head, because someone may be videotaping, and that would not play well on the internet. So you want to think about how much security you have. How is this process going to look? So you want to think about that. But some people have certainly used what's called the gallon jug method. They would have a couple of gallon jugs of water. They would then go to the burrow, pour the water. They would just simply take the gallon jug, pour it into the hole, shove it right into the hole. And the idea was, as the water would diminish, the ground squirrel would actually pop up into the gallon jug. The gallon jug. I have never tried it personally. I've talked to people who have used it, and they say it works. I would probably suggest a 2-person team, because some 13-line ground squirrel holes have 2 openings. So you'd have one person on one hole, one person on another. But if a lot of times a 13-line ground squirrel's running into a hole, and it's not their den hole, but it's actually an escape hole, as we mentioned before. So there wouldn't be a second hole. So you would just simply put that gallon jug over the hole, pour that water in, and he's going to run up inside the gallon jug, and then you have him. The screw top lids can be very helpful, and you would then kill them or dispose of them according to your state laws. That's pretty much about it when it comes to 13-line ground squirrels. So you have some different options out there. It's the kind of job, it's sort of like chipmunks. It's sort of small. You're not going to make a lot of money on it, but it's something where it can be kind of fun. They can get kind of numerous in certain situations, like if you get a cemetery job or something, or maybe where you're working at a golf course. So there can be some ways, but oftentimes it's just going to be a quick job, an easy job that you're not going to make a ton of money on, but you might be able to get some cross-selling. Maybe you find that they got ants or termites or something else and use it as a way of generating some other revenue. Maybe you can get a chimney cap on. It keeps you out there, it keeps you busy, and people will remember your name. And they reproduce a lot, so they'll probably be back if they have a reservoir nearby. But again, notice I didn't talk about glue boards. Not going to be a fan of glue boards in this situation. I would not recommend using them. Will it catch one? Probably. If you put some glue boards all around the burrow, yeah, you're probably going to catch one, but it might be a hot mess. So have some fun. 13-line ground squirrels are definitely cute. And make some money on it. And understand it's a short season, because they're going to be hibernating, so you don't have a lot of time. They will add some work for you in those summer months. But once you start getting into the fall, they're going to be in hibernation. It's going to be all over. I'm Stephen Van Tassel, Wildlife Control Consultant. Hey, I would love to get some ideas on what you want me to talk about. Don't be afraid to send them in. Wildlife Control Consultant at gmail.com. That's Wildlife Control Consultant at gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Back to you, Frank.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Until next time, have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.